Hello, and welcome to another edition of Valley of the Bones podcast. I'm Kev, your favorite felon. How is everybody doing this wonderful, wonderful day? Hopefully, more blessed than stressed. Easier said than done, right? It's all right if we're letting go and letting God. That helps our stress levels for sure. Today, we're going to talk about temptation, walking on the sea. Temptation is it's everywhere. It's prevalent in every facet of the imagination. Be of good cheer, it is I. Do not be afraid. Jesus tells us in Matthew 14:27. Immediately after the Lord has fed the 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fish, he told his disciples to get in the boat and go to the other side of the Sea of Galilee while he prayed on the mountaintop. Even though it was late, darkness was beginning to fall. They did what they were told and boarded the boat and headed off into sea to reach the other side. Now, while they were out there, we know what happened. There arose a storm. The wind picked up a lot and it was against them, so they couldn't get to the other side. And we know that they were rowing for a long, long time, fighting this wind because they went out at the beginning of the evening and they were still trying to get to the other side at the fourth watch, which is just before morning. So they were rowing all night trying to get there. And we can imagine as the wind increased and the waves must have tossed that boat around and around. Of course, the disciples were afraid. They were afraid that they might possibly sink. And then, beyond all this, while they were out there clinging to that boat in fear, all of a sudden they saw someone walking on the water toward them. They thought that it was a ghost and probably shrieked out of terror to see this man walking to them. They probably thought it was a ghost coming to get them, to take them away. They're all going to die out there at the sea. But the Lord said, be of good cheer. It is I. Do not be afraid. And then Peter, the one who always seemed to act as a spokesman for the disciples, said, Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you on the water. So the Lord said, come. And Peter actually got out of the boat and began to walk on the water to the Lord. But then we're told he looked up and saw the wind and how it was whipping the water around, and he began to doubt. He became afraid and he started to sink, and so he called out, Lord, save me. And then we're told immediately the Lord grabbed a hold of him, took him up. He was saved. Then as soon as they got in the boat, the wind ceased and there was a still calm over everything. And too, we can imagine right then the rays of the morning sun began to shine on the horizon. And then all the disciples who were in the boat knelt down before the Lord because they knew truly he was the Son of God. Now, this story of the disciples' journey, their encounter with the wind and the wave and the Lord coming to them on the water, represents something in our lives. We are all commanded to go forth on a spiritual voyage toward the life of heaven. And on the way, we encounter storms, spiritual storms, which can shake our very foundation. The particulars of this story explain what we encounter in our lives as we set out to do the Lord's will, what will happen to us, and what the Lord expects of us. It's important to recognize that the disciples did not take this journey on their own. The Lord commanded them to enter this boat and make their way to the other side of the sea. In the same way, Lord commands us to take that spiritual journey towards his kingdom to begin living better lives. The disciples do as he commands and enter the boat. A boat in the word represents doctrine. And if we pause to reflect on this, we can understand why. Doctrines are vessels which contain the truth. They are ideas, notions that we have formed about life from experience and from the word. We fashion them from our own hands and use them to help us move forward in life. When we set forth on our spiritual voyage, these doctrines serve as our foundation. We rely on certain doctrines and beliefs to hold us up, to get us through each day, to sail through the uncharted seas of our lives. Now, the Lord commanded the disciples to enter the boat. In the same way, we're commanded to take what we know and use it in our life to begin to go towards heaven. But what so often happens when we set off to do the Lord's will? We start off so well, clear sailing, all's calm. But out of nowhere, a storm arises and we are caught right in the middle of it. And all of a sudden, the wind's against us. It's not so easy to get to the other side, to do the Lord's will. We find ourselves right in the middle of temptation, and it shakes the very foundation of our thoughts. We are told that the wind was boisterous, and it must have tossed the disciples' boat all over the sea. And if we compare this to our lives, this is exactly what happens to us as we endure our spiritual storms. We can feel as if we're being tossed to and from spiritually. When we first set sail, we felt as if we were on firm foundation, that our doctrine was strong, it would keep us afloat. But in time of temptation, the foundation, as it were, drops out from under us. We don't know what to believe anymore. We can feel like we're being tossed back and forth by our emotions, by our doubts, by our natural inclinations to do evil. It can be very distressing to us. We cling to the boat as our notions of what is right and wrong, very much afraid that we might sink. In this story, there's much emphasis on the wind. The wind is boisterous. Peter sees the wind. The writings say that wind here represents false reasonings, falsity that whirls around in our spiritual minds and whistles in our ears. These false reasonings begin to whip up in us, to tell us lies. They can blow us all over the place as we encounter the storm of temptation. They fight against us so that we cannot reach our spiritual destination. Now, what would these things be? What are false reasonings? They may sound abstract, but they are not. They are thoughts induced by the hells which are contrary to the Lord's word. If we are in an argument with someone and we feel we've been offended, we can come into temptation. We want to hurt the person who offended us. Now remember, the Lord said we should forgive. We should love our neighbor, but the false reasonings begin to whip up within us and say, don't just stand there. The person just run all over if you don't say something nasty back to them. That's false reasoning. We find that we're getting caught up in the storm of disillusion. We feel we're getting nowhere spiritually. The winds of false reasoning whisper in our ears that we are exactly correct. We are worthless. We can't change into a better person. We might as well give up right now before we get any more depressed. That is false reasoning. This is true with all temptations. In any temptation that we are going through, we should ask ourselves, what are the false reasonings that whip around in our minds trying to sink our boat, trying to stop us from reaching the other side? The disciples were afraid when they saw this wind, and they clung unto the boat, just as we can be afraid in times of temptation. But things are not as hopeless as they appear. The Lord was coming to them walking on the water, and the Lord comes to us in temptation. In fact, the writings tell us that anyone must go through temptations if they want to feel progress. If they want the Lord to come into their lives, don't feel sorry for yourself if you're going through temptations. The Lord is coming to you. The Lord says, be of good cheer. It is I, signifying his presence. We may not feel him all the time, but he is there. He's coming to us. And if we hold on, if we try to do his will, he will come to us. But first of all, when the disciples saw the Lord coming to them, what happened? Well, they didn't recognize him. They saw him as a ghost coming to them, something cold and lifeless. And they cried out for fear. Imagine that. These grown men cried out for fear. What does this represent in our lives? It represents us in temptation. Seeing the Lord and his teachings as being something cold and lifeless that can't help us, something scary. If we want to get our neighbor back in the middle of a quarrel, when we look at those teachings about forgiveness, they look cold to us. They scare us. I don't want to forgive, we can say. If we're tempted, for example, to think or act lasciviously, teachings about conjugal love, chastity, purity can seem so dry, so cold, so lifeless. In the midst of marital turmoil, the teachings about keeping the marriage together, to work together, conjugal love, can seem dead to us, even frightening to think about. In all temptations we have, the truth is that we need the most often looks the most frightening. If it looks like a ghost, like something is going to hurt us and not help us. But we've got to pay heed to that teaching if we want to make it through temptations. It's the Lord speaking to us, not an apparition. The Lord calls out, "Be of good cheer, it is I," to show that if we follow, the Lord will save us. He came to save us. He didn't come to hurt us. The teachings are given to us, not to scare us, but to help us through the storm. And then Peter gets out of the boat. Peter represents the faith in us in which to follow the Lord, which wants us to understand. So that faith within us calls out, "If it's you, command me to come to you." That Peter within struggles, wants to let go of that boat, to let go of our preconceived notions of what's right and wrong, to face with the storm of temptation and follow these teachings. That faith wants to walk toward the Lord, even though the Lord is not yet recognized to be what the loving God He is. That faith within us wants to reach out and do what is right. And we can all feel that in temptation, when the wind is howling and we are being tossed around at one time or another, we recognize that the Lord's truth has power and we can follow it. But do we have the courage to follow it? Do we really have the guts to get out of that boat? This is what the Lord is asking right here. That faith within does and will if we let it. The Lord commands Peter to come. Come, get out of the boat. Come to me. And so Peter gets out of the boat and begins to walk on the water towards the Lord. The miracle is happening. And in our lives, when we begin to follow the Lord, we can see the miracles. We can realize these things are true, that we are actually on top of this temptation. We are persevering in temptation. But then the word shows us how human we are. Peter, because of the wind, begins to doubt. The Lord recognizes that when we start to do His will, even if we begin to see that it's working, we are so tempted to look up at the wind, at those false reasonings. We're so tempted to pay attention to them, to try not to listen to them one more time, to make sure that they're not right. And as soon as we pay attention to those things, as soon as we begin to doubt the Lord, His word, we begin to sink. In the literal sense, Peter cries out, "Lord, save me." And immediately the Lord catches him and holds him up in the eternal sense of the word. In those times when we are full of doubts, when we are sinking, we should cry out to the Lord for help, to recognize that He is the only one who can save us. The temptation is not complete until we have utterly given up. We have to recognize that we can't do it, but the Lord can. And in desperation, we must call to Him, and He will be there. He will catch us before we sink. He will take us into His arms. We're told that when Jesus and Peter entered the boat, the storm ceased. The winds were calm. The waters were calm. And we know what this represents in our lives. It represents the end of that particular temptation. As soon as we respond to the Lord, as soon as we let the Lord take us into His arms, the storm does cease. It becomes quiet in our own minds, and our hearts are quiet. Those doubts disappear. Those false reasonings are gone. And we can really wonder to ourselves, how could I have ever doubted? How could I have ever doubted? The truth comes clear to us. There is peace. And so, is it any wonder that at the time, those disciplines who were in the boat, all of them got down on their knees in front of the Lord and worshiped Him. They knew that truly you are the Son of God. So in life, we have all formed our own vessel to carry us, the doctrines to help us on our voyage. And each one of us is called upon to get into that boat and set out on uncharted seas of life to try to find the right way to heaven. But when we're out there, we have to recognize the storms of temptation will come, and with them, the winds of false reasoning. And in those times of doubt, When we cling to our preconceived notions of what is right out of fear, we must recognize that the Lord is there and coming to us. His teachings may seem frightening to us, but He is within them, and they do have power. If only we, like Peter, trust Him enough to face the storm, to step out and follow His teachings. Doubts will come, and with them, even desperation. But in those times of desperation, we must call upon the Lord. Like Peter, we must say with us inside our heart, Lord, save me. Lord, save me. And we will be saved. He will immediately pick us up and take us in, and there will be peace. And in this calm, as we kneel before Him in a humble recognition of His power, the light of the new day's sun will begin to glisten on the horizon. He turns the shadow of death into morning. Amos 5:8. Even the wind and the seas obey Him. Mark 4:41. So as we go through life, temptations, and our spiritual journey, temptation's going to be there. Fear is going to be there. Problems in our lives are going to be there. Spiritual attacks are going to be there. At those times, we must trust in the Lord. That is when we must seek Him, seek Daddy's comfort, seek Daddy's love. Hope you guys enjoyed today's sermon. Hope it's touched somebody. It's resonated in their lives and will help somebody along the way. Today is March 2023, and it's coming towards end times as people battle these spiritual journeys and so many heed to the demons. Let's not heed to the demons. Let us all worship Christ. Let us worship the one who died for us, the one who loves us, the one who's here for us all the time. Thank you guys for listening, watching. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Please donate to the ministry. Help us to do good things, to bless people, to make this world a better place. Let us be the change in the world that we want to see. Y'all have a blessed day. I love y'all. I'm Kev, and I'm out.